Center for American Progress. I want to welcome all of you to today's event. Before we get started officially, I want to give you a quick piece of housekeeping to let you know that live captioning is available by clicking on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. We have a tremendous program ahead of us. I'll hand it over to Secretary Castro in just a moment, and then we'll move on to Tom Jawitz to moderate a discussion with a fantastic group of panelists. To frame the discussion to come, I want to say just a few words. The United States is suffering from the worst surge in coronavirus cases to date. Since November 4th, the day after the election, we have averaged over 100,000 cases per day. Last week, we hit a new mark of 200,000 cases in a 24-hour period. We have yet to learn how badly Thanksgiving and related travel may impact cases in the days ahead. Sadly, we do know that we're averaging more than 1,000 deaths each day and tens of thousands of Americans are hospitalized. And we do know that people of color continue to be disproportionately impacted by this virus. Black and Hispanic Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be hospitalized than their white counterparts. Hispanic Americans are dying at 1.5 times the rate of white Americans. Black Americans are dying at twice that rate. For these communities, as with immigrant communities, the disproportionate impact of the virus parallels the outsized role that they're playing in helping to fight it. And that is also true for undocumented immigrants. Of the 7 million undocumented immigrants in the workforce, nearly 3 in 4, that's roughly 5 million people, are doing jobs deemed essential to our nation's critical infrastructure. This includes nearly 400,000 people working as farm workers and food processors, 250,000 working as doctors, nurses, and home health aides, and nearly 200,000 working in jobs that keep our hospitals, doctors' offices, and lab facilities open and running. Millions more undocumented immigrants are stocking our grocery shelves, packing our warehouses, and cleaning and sanitizing our buildings. At this time of uncertainty and fear, they are helping to keep this country afloat and fellow Americans healthy and safe. They deserve more than our thanks. They are critical to making America what it is and what it can be. We must recognize them as such, and that means establishing a pathway to citizenship. President-elect Biden has said that in the first 100 days of his presidency, he will send an immigration bill to the Senate that outlines a pathway to citizenship for the estimated 10.4 million undocumented people in this country. And the president-elect is far from alone on this issue. According to a nationwide poll conducted earlier this year, almost 3 in 4 Americans strongly support a pathway to citizenship for undocumented essential workers. It is the right thing to do, and the majority of Americans agree. It will help our country recover economically as we move beyond this pandemic, and it will provide the pathway to a stronger future for all of us. I am now so honored to introduce Secretary Julian Castro. Secretary Castro has long advocated for an inclusive roadmap to citizenship for undocumented individuals and families. He's outlined the need for a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and those under temporary protected status. He's called for stronger labor protections for guest workers and a revamped visa system. He has said time and again that we need an approach to immigration that is both humane and effective. It is an honor to have Secretary Castro not only here with us today, but also as a new member of our board of directors. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining the CAP family. We're privileged to have you with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Mara. Good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I want to give a shout out and say a huge thanks as well to the entire Center for American Progress team, those that focus on immigration, and all of the team. As a new board member, I have to say that for a number of years, I've been very impressed by the work that CAP has done, is doing, and I know will continue to do, particularly now as we stand at the end of 2020 and look toward a more hopeful future with the new administration coming into office at the end of January. I also want to thank all of the panelists who are with us today, because they are a phenomenal group of people who not only have particular insights on the issue of immigration policy, but also have been leading the charge for progressive change for years. And I look forward to that conversation. And to everybody joining us today, thank you for tuning in. You know, there is an image that is stuck in my head from earlier this year. It's an image from California when the wildfires were burning there. Uh, it's an image of workers in a field picking crops with an orange sky and smoke all around them, hard at work to make sure that Americans around the country could have produce on their table. The topic of today's panel is immigrants are essential. And that is so true. And that's been so demonstrated over the course of 2020, a year when we've been hit hard by a pandemic, by an economy that has been damaged from the fallout, and when we have seen how essential immigrants are to the success of this country. As Mara noted, whether it's been in fields, meatpacking plants, grocery stores, out on construction sites, the United States of America cannot prosper without immigrants, including and especially undocumented immigrants, 5 million of whom are considered essential workers in this country. The good news is that after these 4 years of cruelty from the Trump administration, we have an opportunity in the Biden administration to approach immigration policy and the human beings behind that policy with compassion and with common sense. We have an opportunity to both be bold and also to be opportunistic, to take advantage of this moment where there is a recognition of how essential immigrants are, and also to learn some of the lessons of the past so that we don't make the same mistakes. And there is plenty of work to do. I'm encouraged that President-elect Biden has said he'll send within the first 100 days of his administration immigration reform legislation that will provide a pathway to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants. I'm also encouraged that he's willing to use executive action to undo some of the worst aspects of Trump administration policy. And the conversation that we're going to have today is about priorities. It's also about focus. It's about timeline. And just as importantly, it's about a resolve to continue to push, to make sure that we not only undo that damage from the last 4 years, but that we do justice to the human beings behind these stories and behind the laws, to ensure that the United States of America continues to be a nation that welcomes immigrants, that provides a pathway to citizenship for those undocumented immigrants who are here, that embraces the potential of our country through ensuring that dreamers can continue to contribute to the forward progress of our country by achieving their dreams. And we can do all of those things. Now, we've been down this road before several times, even in the last 10 to 15 years. In 2013, of course, 68 senators passed immigration reform legislation, but it went over to the House of Representatives and never got a hearing. In the last few years, there have been pushes and there's been executive action. There was DACA, there was DAPA. Of course, those are also tied up in the courts. What we know is that this time is different. This time is different because of the experience of the Trump administration. This time is different because we know more so than ever before the importance of undocumented immigrants to our economy. And because the progress that we have made and that we can make depends on elected officials having the courage to be bold enough, to be courageous enough to make the right policy, to cast the right vote. And I believe that they will do that. As we have this conversation, I hope that everybody will recognize that it is a question about priorities. It's also a question of pushing. A few years ago, President Obama said that you have to push politicians. oftentimes to do the right thing. And I think that's true. I think of the dreamers in 2012 who pushed and pushed until DACA was promulgated. And then 2 years later, DAPA was promulgated. November 3rd was not an ending, it was a beginning. It was an opportunity for all of us who care about the people behind these immigration laws and the policy to ensure that we don't stop pushing and fighting for them. They have stepped up in this greatest moment of need in 2020 for all of us here in the United States. And now, whether we're activists, whether we're elected officials, or just private citizens with a voice, it is our turn to step up for them. That is our charge. That is the urgency. And I hope that we'll do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Castro. We are truly thrilled and honored to have you in the CAP family, and we're so thankful for your time today. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Tom Javits, and I'm the Vice President for Immigration Policy at the Center for American Progress. In a minute, we're going to continue the conversation with a great group of panelists. But before we get started, just a reminder that you can submit questions using the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen, and you can join our conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag #ImmigrantsAreEssential and following CAP Immigration and AmProg. One thing that struck me from Secretary Castro's remarks, and it's a theme that we heard throughout his presidential campaign, is that he believes positive change must be grounded in putting people first. As we prepare for the incoming Biden-Harris administration, an administration committed to building back better and advancing racial equity throughout our economy, it's clear to so many of us, I think, that we can only do that if we put people first. And that's what today's conversation is ultimately about. As we discuss the contributions and sacrifices that undocumented immigrants have long made in this country, and explore ways in which a new administration and a new Congress can ensure that the national recovery ahead is as dynamic and durable, as inclusive and equitable as it must be to meet the myriad challenges before us. Secretary Castro's opening remarks were a call to action, and it's a call to action not only for those of us who work on and think about policies every single day. It's a call to action for policymakers themselves. It's a call to action for impacted communities and for the general public. This is our moment to achieve positive change that's real and lasting and tangible. The coronavirus pandemic has hit each of us in different ways. But while many of us have been able to transition to largely working from home, even holding our events online, millions of workers across the country have been risking their own health and their family safety to care for us and our loved ones and to keep our communities safe and running. Today, the Center for American Progress is issuing a report that estimates that there are 5 million undocumented immigrants working alongside other Americans in jobs that the Department of Homeland Security itself deems essential to the critical infrastructure of the country. In that new report published this morning, which you can find at americanprogress.org/immigrant-essential-workers, we estimate that 425,000 undocumented immigrants are healthcare workers, serving us and our loved ones as doctors, nurses, and home health aides, or working in key jobs that keep healthcare settings up and running. An estimated 1.7 million are securing the nation's food supply, all the way from farms and food processing facilities to stocking shelves in grocery stores. But even as we recognize the essential work that undocumented immigrants are doing during the pandemic, we must also recognize that this work didn't suddenly become essential. These people didn't suddenly start doing this work. And many of these jobs didn't suddenly become hazardous to the health and safety of workers during the pandemic. This is work, and these are workers who have long been essential to the functioning of the country and its economy. They and their families are woven into the fabric of American life. As we think about the fight ahead to defeat this virus and the road to recovery, it is critical that we also think of them. So it's a privilege now to be joined by leaders on our panel, and I'd ask them all to turn their cameras on. And to save time, I'm going to introduce them together with my opening questions for each of them. And so I wanted to begin by welcoming Mary Kay Henry, the International President of the Service Employees International Union. Thank you again for being with us. Mary Kay, as the representative of one of the largest unions in the country, could you get us started by sharing how this pandemic has shaped SEIU's fight to ensure protections for all workers and what you're hearing on the ground from frontline workers today?
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you so much for allowing SEIU's 2 million members to join in this critical conversation. And I agree with you. Secretary Castro called us to act, and we want to answer his call. And I so appreciate how you and Mara at the beginning painted a picture of the incredible role that undocumented workers have been playing on the front lines of these multiple crises that we've been having to confront on our health, on the economy, on racial injustice, and on the climate crisis. It is put to the surface what workers have been campaigning on for decades. The depth of inequality and exclusion that has to end if the whole nation is going to recover from this pandemic and economic crisis. And you just said that immigrant workers have been on the front lines of this pandemic, risking their lives each and every day to keep our country running without the luxury of being able to work remotely in all of the sectors of the economy that you just described. I wanted to particularly lift up the work that home care providers have been doing because it's invisible. It's going in and out of people's homes to care for elders and people with disabilities, and allows elders and people with disability to live safely and independently with dignity in a home, as opposed to being cared for in a congregate setting like a nursing home, which have experienced the depth of the crisis of the pandemic. 50% of the infections and deaths have occurred in our nation's nursing homes, where immigrant workers are also employed. And I have to say, we were heartbroken when the CARES Act was passed early this year, and immigrants were intentionally excluded. And I think that's the thing that the CAP report shines a light on, and that you've all spoken to, which is it is no accident that immigrant families are being put at risk, because it's a choice that our government continues to make and that corporations have made that deliberately excludes undocumented workers and their mixed status families from access to the services and to the unemployment and healthcare investments that the CARES Act provided. And it's true that the virus and the economic fallout have made it possible for those workers who are less likely to work from home to have the resources to be able to fall back on when one of their family members gets sick. They are still making this ridiculous choice of having to report to work and continue to spread the infection because there's no ability to get access to the healthcare or to the extended unemployment. And yet we say that they're essential. And we can't beat this virus or have a true economic recovery when we have millions of essential workers who are excluded from COVID relief and from laws that give workers rights and protections, or the path to citizenship that Mara talked about. And we know that all of our futures are linked. And this is the moment why I think, as Secretary Castro said, we have to, as a nation, come to terms with deciding against this exclusion. And that's why caregiving is such a key example. Labor law excluded caregivers in the 30s because that caregiving and farm work was done by Black and brown women, Black African-American women in the South, and Black and brown immigrant and Asian women all across the economy. And as our nation ages, this job of home care is the fastest growing in the economy. And at this time, we're going to need to make sure that everyone is in and no one is out if we really want to tackle the virus. And that's why Biden's caregiving plan is an incredible opportunity to do just that. The Biden Care Plan invests in these jobs see these jobs as essential to the economy recovering, essential to tackling the virus, and essential to make sure that Black and brown women are included in the fullness of the economic recovery by making these minimum wage, no benefit, no guaranteed hour jobs, secure jobs that have a living wage with secure benefits and the ability to raise a family by doing one job. And it will be a game changer for millions of women, immigrant women, Black women, Latinas, Asians who care for our children and elders so we can go, the rest of us can go to work. We have to do this for all immigrant workers. And that's why I'm proud to stand with the Center for American Progress, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, the Dreamers, everybody that's represented on this panel, because this is the moment where we can join together and demand access to COVID relief and recovery for everybody in our nation, regardless of their citizenship status, and finally get every excluded immigrant on a path to citizenship so that immigrant communities can thrive is key for a safe and healthy recovery for all of us. We can't wait. Our health and well-being depends on one another's well-being, and we have to act together now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That obviously is a really, really great segue to the next person I want to turn to, Ai-jen Poo. Ai-jen is the co-founder and executive director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance. You know better than most domestic workers are women of color, and more than a third are foreign-born. In the early days of the pandemic, the country's vision for essential workers, the conversation was more narrowly focused on doctors and nurses, paramedics, and the like. But over time, it's become clear that the work of other care providers is no less essential. Many domestic workers are caring for some of the most vulnerable populations impacted by the pandemic. Mary Kay provided some of those really chilling statistics in her remarks. But too often they're forced to navigate this crisis and other crises alone and without a safety net. I'm wondering if you could talk about the challenges facing domestic workers at this moment, in particular immigrant women who do make up a disproportionate share of that workforce.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Tom, and to everyone at the Center for American Progress for your incredible, steadfast leadership on these issues, and to Mary Kay, who just laid out our entire vision around caregiving in an inclusive future that really does honor our caregivers and our domestic workers and the essential workers who work in our homes. And so, Tom, as you mentioned, I represent the nannies, the house cleaners, and the home care workers who we rely on every single day to make sure that our loved ones are cared for and safe, and that our homes are safe and orderly and healthy. And it is work that we call the work that makes all other work possible, because it is that fundamental work that takes place before anything else can happen to ensure that our most important, our most precious aspects of our lives are in good hands. And it's also one of the industries with the highest concentration of undocumented workers in the entire US workforce. And so even though some of the public discourse about immigrants and who undocumented immigrants are would try to other immigrants as some kind of alien entity, the truth of the matter is that we leave our most precious people, the people that we love the most, in the hands of undocumented workers every single day. And in fact, we could not function. American families could not care for our loved ones without an undocumented workforce of domestic workers every single day. And what's happened in the COVID crisis has just been devastating. We have a situation where in the first month of the pandemic, 90% of domestic workers lost their livelihoods, lost all of their income. And we had early meetings where we had members who held their phones up to a Zoom screen to show us there was literally 1 cent left in their bank account. And we're talking about a workforce that is 3 out of 4 domestic workers are the primary income earners for their families. And 9 out of 10 are mothers of small children, children who are school age. And so that means they're also trying to navigate online learning, kids home from school, how to put food on the table and ensure that their kids don't fall behind. We have members who are parents of children with special needs who have literally no resource to try to figure out how to take care of their own children, even as we leave our own children in their hands. And so the devastation of this time, it has been a crisis of impossible choices and exclusion from relief and resources. And it is simply, it's nothing short of a full-blown depression. Even as we're months and months into the pandemic, 40% of the domestic workforce is still unemployed. And for those who are reemployed, the wages are lower than they were before. And all of the burden of safety in this time, as the pandemic rages on, domestic workers are being forced to pay out of pocket for safer modes of transportation, for PPE, for regular COVID testing. So the burden of safety is falling on the shoulders of the people with the least amount of power and resources to navigate it. And the question of immigration status is fundamental here. And it's fundamental not only for the ability of this workforce and their families to survive this unprecedented time of crisis, but as Mary Kay said, it's actually a fundamental question about the future of American families. There's literally no way that we can meet our caregiving needs in this country without a strong immigrant care workforce. One that has a path to citizenship and full and equal protections under the law as workers, as essential workers, full access to healthcare. These are basic fundamental building blocks to critical infrastructure that is necessary in order for an economic recovery to be possible. Mary Kay and I always talk about care jobs, domestic work jobs, home care jobs, childcare jobs. These are job enabling jobs. So investing in them, being safe and dignified jobs with a path to citizenship, is not only beneficial to those workers and their families, but is beneficial to all of us who are going to rely upon, if we don't already, a strong caregiving workforce to show up every day to ensure our family's well-being. And one last note is on this growing aging population we have in this country that the COVID crisis has really brought our attention to. Every single day, 10,000 Americans turn 65. In this country. 4 million people per year are aging into retirement and living longer than ever. And all of our aging loved ones, they want to age in place, in the community, connected to our families and the life that they know. And the way that that happens is through a home care workforce that is strong, that has a strong immigrant workforce supporting it, that has a path to citizenship. So I guess I'll say that, yes, domestic workers have been on the front lines of the pandemic, and they're also key to our economic recovery and our long-term well-being as a country. And that means a path to citizenship is key for all of us.
Thank you so much. I want to remind everyone, by the way, that we have a Q&A tab at the bottom. So if you want to participate in the conversation and fill out some questions for our panelists, we'll be queuing those up. And one thing just on what Aijen mentioned, in the report that we released today, we do mention that obviously with baby boomers while leaving the workforce, researchers have found that without immigrants and their children, the working age population in this country would contract by 4%. That's 7 million workers between 2015 and 2035. But with new Americans and with Americans whose parents were born abroad, the working age population is anticipated to grow by 10 million, right? So we're, even as we're seeing more people leaving the workforce, we're seeing the working age population would literally shrink, but for immigrants and their children entering that workforce. So I want to turn now to Gerline Joseph, the president of the Haitian Bridge Alliance. You've been fighting for and empowering Haitian immigrants throughout the country, and have been a leading voice in the efforts to protect Haitian TPS, which has come under assault during this administration. Frequently, immigration is presented as a Latino issue, but we know immigration is also a Black issue, and that the fight for immigrant justice is intertwined, as Mary Kay mentioned, with the fight for racial justice. As we look at how the coronavirus pandemic and its economic fallout have hit Black communities and Black immigrant communities as well, particularly hard, can you talk about what you're hearing from your partner organizations around the country and what you and they need to see in order for the recovery ahead to be sufficiently inclusive and equitable?
Thank you so much, Tom, and the entire team at CAP. Thank you to my amazing justice warriors on this panel today and Secretary Castro for joining us. You know what, Tom, the very fact that we have to come in today and have to say that immigrants are essential shows that there's something missing. We knew we have always been essential. We knew that Black women has always been essential from the beginning of the founding of this country. We knew that our Native brothers and sisters have always been essential to the survival of us all. So the fact that we have to continue to affirm our humanity, to affirm that we are essential, shows that something is missing. So now, as a Haitian American woman, as a Black immigrant woman, I cannot, right, disconnect my Blackness from my immigration status. I cannot disconnect from my gender. I cannot disconnect with the fact of the pain that I see every day when it comes to social economy issue within our community. As Tom mentioned, I am the executive director of the Haitian Wood Alliance and also the Black Immigrants Bail Fund, working specifically to focus on issues of Black immigrants from the Caribbean and Africa, while we also partner with our Latin American brothers and sisters and our AAPI brothers and sisters to make sure that whatever happens, our communities are included. Immigrants are not a monolith community, right? We have Central Americans, we have Indians, we have Haitians, we have Jamaicans, we have, Africans. So as I sit here today with you in New York, I can tell you how hard the Haitian community has been hit right here in New York because the majority of our community members are what are now being proven to the rest of the United States and the world are essential workers. From our people who are picking the tomatoes in California and the avocados in California, and people in the poultry farms in Pennsylvania, to the cab drivers in New York City, to my aunt who just passed away as a TPS holder, as a caregiver, as a nursing assistant, working day and night to provide for others without having the protection that she needs. That is the reality of our communities across the country, across the world. So we have to continue to center the lives, the narratives, the stories of Black immigrants, of Latinx immigrants, AAPI immigrants, because we understand that until we affirm the lives of Black folks, we cannot affirm the life of us together. So as I sit here and I'm hearing from doctors and nurses and caregivers and nannies, thank you, Mary Kay and Hajan, for pushing for those quote unquote now essential workers, for making sure they are protected. So we have to come together to continue to sacrifice and make sure that everything works as my fellow panelists mentioned. TPS, we know close to 60,000 Haitians are under the temporary protected status, but we have to make sure that their lives are not temporary. And that is the reality, because without them, as my fellow panelists mentioned, the rest of us cannot do the other work that we do. Essential workers, immigrants, women, Black immigrants, understanding, as my brother Tom mentioned, immigration is a Black issue. As I sit before you, we have to understand my wholeness, right? My community's wholeness, what they bring to the table, whether it is at the highest level to what might seem as to the lowest level. We need each and every one of us. As the body itself, we need the head, the hands, the feet in order for us to function properly. So it is time as a country, as a nation, as a society, that we not only embrace, but we empower every single part of that body, because we understand out of many, one. So in order for us to move forward, we must bring to the table the voices, not just for me to come and speak on their behalf, but bring the voices of the nurses, of the taxi drivers at the table so that they can tell us, this is what I need. This is what my family needs to survive. That is why at the Haitian Bridge Alliance, we provide direct services, we do organizing, and we work on policy, because we understand that they all come together. In order for us to have proper policies, we have to be able to understand the needs of the community. So that is why we are here today with this panel, to make sure people understand, yes, immigration is a Black issue. Immigration is an Asian issue, is a Latinx issue. Immigration is an us issue. And the fact that, I'll repeat, we have to continue to say Black Lives Matter. We have to continue to say we are essential, prove that we have to dismantle the system that was created on racism and rebuild so we can build better. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gerline, and honestly, our condolences for your family's loss just very recently as well. I'm really excited. That was a really good transition, frankly, to our final panelist, Vicente Reyes. Vicente is a second-year student at Bakersfield College, a DACA recipient, a farm worker, and a member of the United Farm Workers Foundation. Vicente, recently you and I actually testified before Congress on the essential role that immigrant workers are playing during the pandemic. But the work that, and again, this builds on what Gerline was saying as well, the work that you and your parents have done these past 9 months is a continuation of the work that you began doing as a kid, working with them in the fields. So you personally know the work and response and sacrifices that farm work requires. And I'm wondering if you can share with us today, again, this goes to really a key point that I think Gerline was really, was throughout her remarks, what it means to be both essential and undocumented, right? And those two things, holding those two thoughts together at the same time, and how this pandemic has impacted you and your family.
Yes, hello everyone, good morning. It's great to be with you today. Yes, today, I was only 12 years old when I started working in the fields alongside my parents. Before I even finished 8th grade, I had spent several seasons harvesting onions. Although I am a DACA holder, my parents are undocumented, and for 10 years, I have worked with them harvesting table grapes, avocados, carrots, onions, tangerines, beets, kale, lettuce, and potatoes in Kern County, California, where I currently live. My parents and I have not stopped working in the fields, despite the fearing of deportation when we hear about ICE raids in agriculture, even during the pandemic. When the pandemic started, we were unable to shelter in place because we were designated as essential critical infrastructure workers. And as essential workers, we wondered, how would we get to work without being stopped or cited by the police because we're driving during the shelter in place orders? We also wondered, if the nation is relying on us to work, will employers provide us with protections and benefits if we get sick? And if our work is essential, would my parents and others be protected from detention and deportation? At work, being an essential worker has not meant that we get protections from COVID. Everything at work runs as if the pandemic doesn't exist, even though Kern County has over 42,000 cases of COVID-19 and over 400 people have died from the virus. No one in our family or in our crew has received masks, special instructions about workplace social distancing, or sanitation. not once has our employer screened us for symptoms. I also know that many undocumented farm workers are afraid to test positive of COVID-19 because this would require them to quarantine at home without pay and without benefits to survive. Everyone knows that we don't speak out because many of us are undocumented. To feed the nation, we are exposed to extreme heat, pesticides, to the risk of getting COVID-19, and more recently, to the wildfires and the air that's unhealthy to breathe. We are at the core of the food supply chain, and without our labor, the food supply chain would collapse. My family are among the 5.5 million essential workers and the 11 million people who are undocumented and live with endless fear about our future. And for those reasons, I believe that farm workers and the rest of our nation's undocumented immigrants deserve a path to legalization and citizenship that recognizes the essential role that we play in this nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vicente. Again, so if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab. Mary Kay, one of the things we've talked about a couple of times now is these different frames through which to view the issue of immigration. And so as we talk about why it's important that a comprehensive national recovery plan include a robust legalization program for undocumented immigrants, to us, I think it's really important that we understand this as not just a matter of immigrant justice, but a matter of economic justice also. Frequently, we have seen in the past that people who have power, people who have wealth, try to turn working people against one another as a way of preserving their own privilege. And we see people divided along race lines, along class lines, and along immigration status. I worked in the House Immigration Subcommittee for years, and I saw that every hearing we had. Given the pain that so many people around the country are experiencing now, I'm sure we're going to see people sowing division once again. And so I wanted to hear from you at SEIU. SEIU has been such a stalwart defender of immigrants' rights as a workers' rights issue over the years. And I'd like to hear from you what you want to see from the country's economic recovery to make sure that it empowers all workers, including undocumented immigrants who are contributing so much.
Well, I want to see what we've been talking about on this panel and what Secretary Castro called for. I want to see immigrants included in every government action to provide COVID relief and recovery. And I want to see immigrants included in the path to citizenship and all the rights that are provided by our government. And I want corporations to be a part of affirming the lives of immigrants, as Jorlene did so beautifully. Like, we have to center the importance of making sure every Black life matters and intervening on that exclusion in order to also center the inclusion of immigrants. We have 300,000 immigrant families in our 2 million member family of SEIU. And we know that one undocumented worker in a mixed status family has excluded that family from access to any public benefits and services under the CARES Act. And we are not going to tackle this pandemic as a nation unless we include everybody. And I think you're right, Tom. We saw, as we worked with our conservative white members in 2019 in preparing for the 2020 election, that the single issue that made them pause on joining our union's endorsement of Biden was how the current president was misleading people about immigrants taking their families' jobs, which, as you know, is a throwback to an argument that was made 40 years ago that we overcame during the Obama administration, and we're beginning to unite the fights in white workers understanding I am not going to have a living wage until Black and immigrant workers have a living wage. And we finally connected those dots for people. And I have to say, I believe the last 4 years has set us back on needing to remake that case. And we doubled down with our white conservative members on actually introducing them to our immigrant members and building on the relationship of trust and love for each other that was the currency that carried people to understand that divide and conquer, hateful, racist speech was not welcome in our house, and that we have to, if we're going to do better together in raising wages and creating living wage work, we're going to need to include immigrants and affirm Black lives of every status in this nation. But that doesn't just happen by me saying it in a speech. It happens by intentional work that we all are doing to help people understand how our destinies are linked in a real way. And that's why you're linking it to, I can't win economic justice for me and my family as a white woman unless I stand in solidarity and fight for racial and immigrant justice for all families. And you just need to look at the 64 million people that earn less than $15 an hour as the evidence for why that is true. When minimum wage work has more Black, brown, and Asian workers than any other kind of work in this nation, that's not an accident. That's a structural decision that happened because of exclusion by our government and corporations. And we can unleash minimum wage work and turn it into the foundation of the most racially diverse, inclusive middle class this nation's ever seen. Our last middle class from the industrial area did not include everybody. And this time, our nation has a chance to include everybody. And all of us will do better. And so that's the case that our union has been making for the last 60 years. It's the case that other unions are making. It's the case that I know NDWA and the Haitian community organizations, we have to stand against the hateful speech that has only escalated in the last 4 years. And that's why I think doing this panel is so well timed. It's critical that we all return to making the case to our own members about why why these two things have to happen together if we're going to raise wages and create good jobs that people can support their families on.
That's super helpful. And one thing that makes me think of really is having been in Congress in 2009-10 during the Great Recession. While the economic challenge ahead is it brings back echoes of that time. The fact this was caused by this global pandemic that has hammered all of us feels different. Feels like it should be a different frame for the moment that we're entering. There was a period in March and April when it was very clear and tangible to everyone that we were in this fight together. And it does feel like both as we continue the fight now, we're in the third wave in many places, and we're going to be working toward rebuilding. We again need to have that moment of solidarity that we are truly all in this together, and we're going to need all of us to pull ourselves out. Jen, we've talked a lot about the important work that domestic workers and care providers are playing right now during the pandemic. But I love a few of the points you made. You said the work that makes all other work possible, job enabling jobs. I think about this as being care workers are the support structure, the human infrastructure upon which the rest of the economy is built. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about the role that domestic workers will play as we begin to dig out of this hole that we're in and begin to recover. And how you think about the protections that domestic workers need in order to shore up that foundation.
Yeah, I think oftentimes when we're talking about rebuilding out of a recession, we think of investments in infrastructure. And I want us to think about the care economy as critical infrastructure. If we think about infrastructure as that which enables commerce and economic activity to happen, it's not just roads and bridges and transportation systems, it's people who show up to care for our families so that we can work, so that America can get back to work. They provide the childcare services, the home care services, all of these critical infrastructure, foundational services that enable everything else in the economy. And so I think that the Biden 21st Century Caregiving Plan, our president-elect actually has a plan to invest in our caregiving systems as critical infrastructure to make care much more accessible to all the families who need it across the lifespan, childcare to home care, and to make every job in the care economy a path to a good, to economic mobility, economic security, to have living wages, benefits, and a union. And I will say that we have to think about this through an immigration lens, because the truth of the matter is that immigrants are a huge part of our care infrastructure. Every dimension of our caregiving systems and programs, it's Black and brown immigrant women holding it together. This is a different kind of infrastructure than our bridges and tunnels. It's humans, and it's the people that Gerline represents. It's the people that Mary Kay and we represent. And they are going to be critical to our ability to recover into not just the economy that we once knew, but an economy that has a much stronger, more equitable foundation to be able to support working families in this next era. That's the opportunity before us. It's not to go back to normal. It's actually to strengthen critical infrastructure that's at the heart and soul of a thriving economy in a way that actually lifts up the vulnerable workers who have been a gravitational pull to actually pull down conditions for every worker in this economy. If we shore up the floor, including legalizing immigrant workers in sectors like the care economy, but all essential sectors, literally that shores up the floor for every worker to be able to recover into a healthier economy.
Thank you so much. And point that you and Mary Kay both raised is echoed by one of the questions that we got in our list. I want to ask Gerline. So the question is, how can we overcome the structural racism that has led for centuries to an undervaluing of the work that is the essential work that is disproportionately done by Black and brown workers? Mary Kay said it's not going to come from just speeches by me or by Mary Kay. So I'm wondering, as you do some of this work with your community partners, what do you think the challenge ahead is, and how do you tackle it? And you're on mute, sorry.
Thank you, Tom, for this question. The reality is we have to change the system. As Mary Kay mentioned, doing a speech, get the word out. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to roll up our sleeves and dismantle the system that was created and based on racism and build better. What build better looks like. For example, again, when we have a caregiver, a nurse assistant, a CNA who is getting minimum wage for others to survive, I think that is a grave injustice. I think we look at this staircase and we put people at the bottom of it, but the people we put at the bottom of it, as we see, are the most essential people. So we need to make sure we take care of those people that are deemed essential, because without them, as Hadrian mentioned, we cannot prosper. How do we dismantle the system of racism and xenophobia that continues to destroy our lives? We have to build better. We have to center the voices. We have to make sure that we take care of them. Immigrants, for example, myself, I cannot, remove my Blackness, and even my citizenship status as an American citizen does not protect me as a Black woman. Right? So how do we bring all of us together and not doing just the speech, but really do the work, go into the communities, understanding the needs for health care. When we have people giving care and they do not have health care themselves, that is a tragedy. We cannot continue to function in this way. So dismantling the system, build better, create ways for people to live with dignity, and really, as my fellow panelists mentioned, provide living wages for those people. Go into the communities, understanding that, you know, we are in this together. And until we make sure that every Black and brown person, every Black and brown child is given the opportunity to success, we will continue to see the downfall of who we are as we right now. And we cannot go back to a normal. For me as a Black woman, there were never a normal time. We have to move forward in the direction where all lives are sacred, all lives are valued, from the caretakers to the highest person in office, with value, dignity, and respect. So Tom, the reality is, you know, out of many one, we cannot leave anyone behind. So as a Black American, Haitian American woman sitting in front of you again, as Mary Kay mentioned, we will continue, you know, to make sure people here understand, but we have to go into the communities. If I don't have a relationship with you, Tom, you do not know what I feel. If you don't have a relationship with me, I do not know what you feel. So we have to build relationship. We have to invite each other into our lives so that I can care enough for you to make sure that you are well. So whether we do it right now is the question right now. What are we going to do tomorrow to make sure that each and every lives are valued and that we really build better? We really dismantle the system of racism that keeps on pushing us back.
Thank you so much. So we only have time for one more question. I want to turn back to you, Vicente. Like so many DACA recipients in the country, you know, I can imagine that you're filled with a complicated mix of hope and anxiety right now. There is, you know, obviously, I think the incoming administration has promised to restore full DACA protections for people like you, but we also know there's litigation in the courts that continues to challenge DACA itself as a full frontal assault. Similarly, while there are not now protections for you know, hundreds of thousands of undocumented farm workers, including your parents, President-elect Biden has promised to prioritize protections for people who are serving in those kinds of roles during this pandemic. You know, I'd love to hear from you as we get to that sort of the specific question of just lawful status and work authorization. What do you think secure lawful immigration status and work authorization, you know, ideally a path to citizenship at the end of the day, would mean for farm workers who are now undocumented? And then to get to the question that Mary Kay was mentioning as well, and I think all of us have talked about this idea of the floor, what would it mean for all workers in the field today, you know, including US citizens and others who you work alongside every day, to have a workforce that shared that same stable set of protections?
Yeah, getting a path to legalization, it would mean that we get health benefits, being able to go to the doctor. We get personal protective gear, such as masks, hand sanitizers, cleaner restrooms. We would also have the ability to get sick pay days and not have to worry about losing our jobs if we leave, and also the ability to raise our voices of what's going on and not have the fear of deportation or any fear of speaking out in general if there's anything that's being downplayed by any person, like coworker or our boss.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We are now at time. I want to thank all of our panelists for a really great discussion. And again, I want to thank Secretary Castro for kicking us off. I'd encourage all of you to take a look at our new report today. Again, it's at americanprogress.org, Immigrant Essential Workers. And if you want to rewatch or share this event, it's going to be up at americanprogress.org/events. One question I didn't get to was someone asking, for ordinary folks out there who aren't affiliated with an organization, sort of what can they do to put this into action? Like, Secretary Castro had a call to action. All of us have different campaigns going on. What can we do to drive this forward? And so I think that's a really good question. We can't answer that on the panel today, but I think people should certainly take a look at Immigrants Are Essential, the hashtag, which a number of partner organizations, NILC and Resilience Force, have been lifting up for quite some time. Take a look, obviously, at the work that SEIU, NDWA, Haitian Bridge Alliance, and the United Farm Workers Foundation are doing. And again, once again, feel free to follow American Progress and CAP Immigration on Twitter, and we'll make sure you're getting all the best information. So thank you guys so much. Thanks to all the panelists as well. And thank you for tuning in.